Hello, it's Classy here, back with another Tribes video, and today I'm back with the tier list series where I go through the tier list for every mode, and they have been updated for 1.5 anniversary. So today we'll be doing Laboratory of the Abyss, and with FG, these are the two main special events every time a new banner is released. So the way FG works is that you'll have up to 30 turns, and as long as your units actually survive, you can actually use them throughout the day, and they will be reset at the end of the day. So this mode is a lot more about survivability than timed modes like FG and ATB, where you only have a few turns to deal as much damage as possible. Therefore, this tier list might look a little bit stranger to people who are not familiar with the mode, but let's get right into it. So for SS tier, we have Sakura Blossom. And everyone who is a big fan of Naruto or who knows Naruto very well knows that Sakura usually isn't a character that gets like too much hype in either the anime or the game. People like to call her useless in the community, and of course there's a lot of haters for this character, and her role is reserved a lot of the time to be a healer and kind of like a support in the show itself, in the universe. Until she's older, of course. The adult Sakura absolutely destroys people. But either way, this Sakura is really strong for Abyss. She does healing and increases tribe gauge, which is very important because in Abyss, one of the main methods used by best players to finish the floors is spamming a tribe over and over again. And this tier list video doesn't really cover tribes or characters that are used in tribes. We're considering each unit on its own, but if you want to learn more about how to do that strategy, make sure to check out my previous videos on that. Either way, increasing tribe gauge is very important, and increasing allies HP is very important. For Abyss, you will be having tanks, so they will not die in one shot most of the time, and that's why the HP is helpful. It scales off of attack, which is great because a lot of tribes boost attack. So when you keep using the tribe, she'll be able to heal more, while also letting you use the tribe more. Now her fourth skill also helps her allies be more tanky and increases chakra by a bit. So this is somewhat useful, but not too crazy. It can definitely help some of the units that don't have the best vitalities gain vitality. And unlike some of the other modes that I've covered in the past, vitality is not going to be as important here, but rather how good they are in the context of surviving and helping your team survive. Next up is KCM. I've covered this guy in every single video. He's always been at the top. He has the Insta-Jutsu. He does a ton of buffs, like so many buffs, it's actually crazy. And he has two jutsus that can do different buffs as well. So this guy really covers everything you need for your team. There's a lot of defense in here. There's a lot of offense in here also. So that's why he's great for Abyss, just like every other mode. You really can't go wrong with him. But sometimes people don't always use him. And that's okay because you can beat Abyss without him, for sure, as long as you're following the general strategy. But one of the best tribes does involve him, so he is very popular. Now we have UR Heavy. So I've covered him in the past. He's one of those timeless units alongside Kakashi, and he just does a lot of damage, and he buffs himself when units die. So he's not in the top tier because for the most recent meta, you really don't need to use these high damage nukers like him and Kakashi. You can definitely put them in if you're missing a unit, but most of the time you want to rely on the tribe just for your main damage source and then tanking. But he and Kakashi are both really good still for Abyss because they just do a ton of damage. They have status effects which can help your team survive by preventing tribes or jutsus, and he stacks buffs on himself. So Abyss is a very long mode turn-wise, so units that can stack are going to be very strong because they just keep getting stronger, and there's a really high potential value for them. I'm going to skip side real quick because Kakashi kind of falls in the same category. He can also stack on himself, and he has the good vitality, the initial 10k, so that's Insujutsu, and then he has the stun. I've already covered him a lot, but he's very similar to Hebi. His role in Abyss, the stun really helps, and the good vitality also really helps for early survivability and maybe making some important picks. So Sai obviously is very necessary for a lot of modes, and for this one you don't always need to use him, but he is nice to have on your team, and he works on a lot of Abyss teams because he gives chakra. So that's the main thing about him. It always has been the main thing about him, and chakra is important so that all of your units can jutsu and get all of those benefits. Okay, so Killer Bee version 2. This is a unit that really hasn't scored high in any of the other modes so far. But in Abyss, he's absolutely a monster, and we're going to show you why. If you look at this jutsu, he boosts all of your allies' important defensive stats permanently. So this is really useful for stacking, because every time you use it, you'll just add these effects on top of each other. He also, has the generic tank buffs, so tanks are really important for protecting your key units and protecting each other, so you can tank the enemy's damage instead of trying to pick them off immediately. And he also has self-stacking as well. So overall, he's really good because he takes time to really charge up in a way. Like, to become really tanky, he really needs multiple turns. So that's why he's not so good in the other modes. But for Abyss, where you have so many turns, he just becomes unstoppable. You won't be able to kill this guy. So that's why he's really strong. Kid Naruto is one of the best tanks in the game, for sure. The cool thing about him is he can help out a single cell a ton with his buffs, so you can strategically put him on your team to protect your most important units, or maybe the units with the least defense with him. So he's really good for that, and then in general he just has really good buffs for your team's defense overall. So again, these vitalities not really going to matter that much. So that's it for the S tier. Now we're going to cover the A tier. Gaara, one of the other OG tanks. So Gaara is the OG tank, very popular for its guard rate back then. Now, of course, there's a lot of tanks that have been released in the game, but Gaara is still really strong. And he can actually increase chakra too, which is really cool. But most of the time, you're going to rely on him for guard rate, guard damage reduction rate, really high numbers on his kit. Overall, he's pretty generic for a tank, but he does his job very well. So that is why we have him in the A tier. You can definitely use him. And his LB2 also increases defense, which is not very common to find. So that's pretty cool. Just keep in mind, of course, which of the abilities on these tanks affect the active allies, which of them affect all the allies. So T Mama Sakura, she also has healing. So you might notice that we have a lot of healers at the top tiers. Now her healing is passive, and it's decent, but it's not too much. She also boosts attack for a pretty good amount, so that's alright. But mainly she's just there for stunning. She can debuff enemy attack, so she does increase your defense in a way, indirectly, and she provides the heal and some other buffs. So kind of a jack of all trades unit. Now, most of the time people don't use her anymore if you have a lot of the best units, but you can still use her on your team and she'll be fine. Tsunade, another healer. So unfortunately, she has a lot of effects that apply to attack Shinobi, I think. So unfortunately, although she does have healing, which is not as much as Blossom's, her chakra generation only affects attack shinobi, and on a lot of Abyss teams you don't really have that many attack shinobi. Maybe you'll have one. That's KCM. So that's why this is not as good as the other healers. She also has passive chakra gain, which is pretty helpful, but I'm pretty sure Blossom also has the same thing. Her LP2 is really useful too, so more healing, but overall she just gets outclassed, but you can still use her if you need to. Some Abyss teams, like the one I've showcased before, use 2 healers, so you might be able to use her for the other one. Jiraiya also increases tribe gauge, not as much as Blossom. So Blossom is just really good at doing Abyss stuff. He can boost Tactical Shinobi, which you should have some on your team. So it will be helpful, definitely more than Attack Shinobi. And then, the problem with his 4th skill is that he needs to be defeated to apply some of these buffs. So that's a little unfortunate, but in general, he's just pretty good for the tribe gauge booster role. He's pretty tanky on his own too, I believe. And he does have some jack of all trades abilities also. Chio, probably one of the better healers for Abyss. So, she's a little underrated still. Even after my past few videos, she does do her job very well. The 4th skill that she has is really effective at like healing your most weak targets. So that's helpful. Now, the going last buffs are not really gonna proc, so don't need to worry about those. But the whole point of her is to just heal your weakest allies and keep your team alive just passively. And her jutsu's not bad either. She can help your team, survive a little bit longer, deal some more damage. So overall, a very good healer. SR Heavy, another tank. We know how good he is synergizing with status effects. And you will have some status effects on your Abyss team, so you can definitely use him alongside them. And stunning is always important to prevent the enemies from attacking, using their jutsus or tribes. So that's why it's really important for status effects on your team. And besides that, it just boosts, generic defensive stats like damage destruction rate, guard rate, and his vitality is also good. Seidenmo Jiraiya, very good for Abyss also. He has stun and burn, which definitely is more useful here because you have plenty of turns for the burn to deal as much damage as possible to the enemies. He also boosts, the generic defensive stats once again. He also boosts critical suppression rate, which is a good one that not all the other tanks can. He also heals himself by quite a lot. So, he can keep himself healthy. And yeah, pretty good. Also some stealth stacking. Or not self stacking, team stacking, which is even cooler. CM2 satisfies the role that, your Heavy Kakashi had. He is a nuker. He'll give you guys, he is a nuker. He'll give your team, attack buffs for attacking first, which you should be doing all the time. And his main thing is boosting himself over time and then just dealing as much damage as possible. So, he's pretty good for Abyss. If you look here, he's pretty balanced in all the modes. Kind of underrated, actually. The cool thing is he can just keep boosting his status effect rate as long as he survives. So in Abyss, maybe you'll just keep stunning the people who are going to attack you. So that also helps with defense because you're not getting hit. Toby we talked about in FG. He's really good at reducing defensive stats for defense shinobi, and in Abyss the higher floors will have some very annoying defensive shinobi, so that's why Toby is very valuable in Abyss. He has the stun and the burn to complement that, and he'll help your team do a lot more damage and get rid of those tanks before they stack up also, because some of the tanks in the enemy's team will have self-stacking abilities and, you know, boosting their own defense just like your team, so sometimes you need this to deal with those. Kid Kakashi also can lower defense for defense shinobi, also keeps your team alive with debuffs for attack shinobi. He just does a lot of things for your team. He has all of these buffs for tactical and defense shinobi on your team, which is helpful because, you know, your team mainly is, you know, tactical and defensive shinobi. And then for fourth skill, he's going to have these passive buffs that proc every time, because you should be attacking first, just like I mentioned with CMD. So overall, Kid Kakashi is pretty good for Abyss. Next up is Obito. Again, helps satisfy the nuker role for Abyss if you ever need one. He does nice debuffs on a single target, does a lot of damage. He can help his allies out somewhat. Then he stacks on himself, so he'll get stronger over time and deal a lot more damage. Has the good vitality. The nukers here will have good vitalities most of the time. For example, Minato. So he's a T nuker, but he still has the good vitality. He also stacks buffs on himself. He just does a lot of good damage, especially to D units. So that's why you mainly want to put him in here. You can also use him to provide some sort of offensive buffs to your team. Itsuki, really great for Abyss actually, because, you know, he does a lot of damage. He's a T nuker like Minato. He has the good vitality. He has a stun. Then he debuffs enemies' damage, which is helpful for keeping your team alive. So yeah, this guy just has a lot of great debuffs on the enemy. That's why he's good for Abyss. Mei, she can increase status effect rate, then critical damage increase rate. So in the FG video, that's really helpful. And in Abyss, it's also pretty helpful, but she also has a lot of defensive buffs for your team, like the guard damage reduction rate, which is great. And then she debuffs the opponent's ninjutsu and tribe special damage increase rate, starting at the beginning of the battle. So that gives your team time to get their chakra up to get ready to jutsu. So that's great. And then, you know, she has other defensive buffs. So got a lot of things going on for her, and she does her job very well. And again, I didn't specifically mention the disclaimers verbally this time. They'll be at the beginning of the video, and these are not in order from best to worst in A tier or in any other tier. I just have to make sure I say that so people don't get confused. So Kid Sasuke is also a nuker. He also has a stun. I like how he regens his chakra, so that he'll be able to jutsu as much as possible every time she comes back into rotation. He also has buffs for your team that are offensive. So yeah, all of these gives your ally some chakra as well. Also stacks on himself. So just like some of those other nukers, stacking buffs on yourself is really helpful for this mode because you have a lot of time, as long as you don't die. So once again, we have a white mask, very similar to Zeidmo Jiraiya. He has the stun, he he has debuffs, so that's really helpful for dealing with some of those tanky units and also helping your team survive. He has a lot of the tank abilities. And like Jiraiya, he actually can stack defense on your team as a whole, so that's really cool. But you do need to have some losses, so that might not be as useful. In that case, White Mask is very clearly a power creep version of Sailor Moon Jiraiya in a lot of ways. Hashirama actually pretty good for this mode. He satisfies the tribe gauge booster, so he gives as much as Blossom does. He does pretty good damage on his own. But one of the main things about his jutsu is that he debuffs enemies' attack and defense stats. So similar to some of the other T-unit jutsus. And then, he just has some pretty generic but pretty decent buffs, but only for the active allies. So that's why he's not as good as some of the others. And then this is alright, but the numbers are a little bit low. And it doesn't happen like a bunch of times. It just happens once. So overall, he does his job well as a tribe gauge booster, but there are better ones. So this is Time Travel Sasuke. He has the good vitality on a tank. He has a lot of great buffs on his jutsu with burn for extra damage. He has a lot of buffs on his fourth skill. The status effect suppression rate is helpful because you really don't want to get stunned. You want to keep your rotation perfect as long as you can, because that will increase your tribe gauge fast. That way you can tribe more. And by that I mean you want to get the rotation to a point where the 3 units of the same cell are together. So just match the colors, basically. Also a little bit of stacking. Nagato, similar to CM2, similar to Kid Kakashi in a way with his fourth skill, but I really like his because his provides a lot of important offensive buffs every single turn, basically, as long as you keep your speed. He's like just a huge nuker, so you want to use him for that, and also he does a lot of good debuffs to increase your own team's damage output. So that is very similar to the other nukers on this list. Speaking of debuffs and increasing damage output, Shikadai is very good at that. Right in the beginning of the battle, he'll be debuffing the enemy's defense straight away, so sometimes you need to take out a prime target, and this will help you do so. And then when he jutsus, he'll also debuff them, and he'll also help your allies survive longer and crit more. Then he stacks upon himself so he can keep stunning. So I didn't mention that he could stun yet, but he can do that with his jutsu also. Then he can increase the chance that he does it again and keep doing that. So overall, sounds pretty useful, but on a perfect team, you probably wouldn't use them still. But very few of us will have perfect teams because we don't always have all the units for that. But either way, he actually, in theory, is very good for Abyss. I haven't seen too many people use him yet, but he does his job well, and remember, you need to take out those tanks on their team also. So he'll do that for you. Madara is great. His fourth skill protects a single cell by a ton. And also all your allies. But that's kind of like Kid Naruto, where you can place him with your most important units, and he'll make sure that those guys don't die. He has stacking on himself, which is really great. Both offensive and defensive stacking, so that's really strong. For Abyss, especially. He has the good vitality. He debuffs tanks really well, so overall Madara is really good for Abyss. Don't let him fool you just by being here in the A tier. You could definitely use this guy. And he does good nuking damage on his own also as a T nuker. So overall, really strong. And I forgot to mention that I use him on my own team. So this is KLM Naruto, one of the newest units. He also increases tribe gauge, so he can serve as that role, the tribe gauge booster. But he's great because he just increases your team's damage output by a ton with all of these buffs and debuffs on his jutsu. He has stun. Vitality is not the best, but after the second turn, you'll be all good. So just keep him alive for that. But either way, he's an AoE nuker. And we usually don't use those because counter damage exists. And you take a lot of damage from AoE if you're hitting tanks and they just counter you. Like multiple tanks counter you. Then you just take a ton of damage and you have no HP left. But he can do other things besides just nuking. So that's why he's up here. Then a lot of offensive buffs, once again, on his fourth skill. Also more stacking up on himself, just like the other nukers in this list. Now, the last one in A tier, not necessarily the worst one, he's actually very strong, is EMS Sasuke. So he's a T unit, he has a lot of support, good chakra vitality. So here's all these offensive buffs, here's all of these defensive buffs. Here's a bunch more of offensive and defensive buffs with status effect suppression rate also to help your runs out. So you don't have to reset as much maybe. He also stacks buffs upon himself just like a lot of the other Uchiha clan. So that's why he's really good. He's like one of the best jack of all trades T units you can put on your team. There we go. A tier is pretty much covered by now. This is once again a very long video. B tier, I really am not going to mention too many people. Just remember that the tribes are not considered. So for example, here is the commander of Heavy tribe, and that's one of the best tribes to use, but these guys are in B tier individually. I will talk about T Sakura actually. I like how her healing is more than Tsunade's and she boosts defense instead of giving chakra back to attack shinobi only. So I'd say that she still has a lot of value, even though she's in this tier for now. She's probably a very high B. And 60% is a lot for defense. She boosts defense even more, then heals even more, so she does the healer's job very well. Also some defensive buffs. Now, maybe the issue is that it's just active, but I think that she can definitely replace some of the other healers on your team if you really need to. And she should be decently tanky also. So I will give a special shout out to this unit. Let's see. Most of the other units are either just generic tanks that are just overshadowed by the other units above them. Maybe they're just not fit for this Abyss mode. So, you know, Santa Naruto, some of the other nukers here, just not as good as they are in the other modes. And of course, below that are just units that haven't been good in most of the other modes anyways. So they're consistently on the lower tiers. So I hope this video helped you guys with Abyss. The next banner will have an Abyss, so maybe you can use some of this knowledge to help you out. Of course, if you actually want to learn how to do team building, you have to definitely check out some of my guides that I've made for these different modes, or maybe head over to my server so you can learn about team building on a personal level with our instructors. And overall, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Thanks for watching.